Howdy. Monday's lesson is about 9/11. All last week we talked about terrorism in America. We talked about Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing. We talked about a lot of bad things that happened. We talked Columbine and all. We talked about how the Twin Towers were attacked. Lesson today is about 9/11. The attacks on 9/11 shocked our country. It brought America together like I haven't seen in my entire life. We were attacked. It was just like Pearl Harbor. America was attacked and we united. But 9/11 changed everything. It changed the way you get on airplanes today and everything else, how you look at the world. So today we're going to take a look at 9/11. Your assignment on the classwork part of this is going to be for you to interview your parents, relatives. What do they remember about 9/11? How did it affect them? And that'll be on the classroom side. But this part will give you kind of a background of what happened. You kids, you don't remember 9/11. Most you weren't born then even. But your parents do. Everybody that lived back then remembers when America was attacked and the Twin Towers came down. Okay, if you look at the far right over here, this is Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden's organization, Al Qaeda, hated the United States. They hated us for being in the Middle East. We were in Saudi Arabia because Saddam Hussein was still in Iraq, and he was an enemy and he was danger, so America kept troops in Saudi Arabia. Al Qaeda was angry that Americans, infidels, would be in the Holy Land, and they demanded we get out. They didn't. They would be behind other terrorist attacks. Remember that we talked last week, that boat, the little rubber boat that hit the side of the coal, the damage it did there, the sailors it killed? Well, they decided this time to do it in a big way. And you got to give the devil his due. They were ingenious in their attack. They decided to use airplanes as weapon. Because when you take a look, those of you have flown on airplanes, you look how big they are. That's a big airplane, you know? When it's flying 300 miles an hour, that's a big weapon, big mass of metal, plus your momentum. And when you add on to that, 10,000 gallons or whatever at aviation fuel, which is highly explosive, you've got yourself a hell of a bomb. Now, this concept of using an airplane as a weapon is as old as World War II, where the Japanese used, kamikaze planes at our destroyers and stuff, and our aircraft carriers in the Pacific. So Osama bin Laden's group, Al Qaeda, they brought people to America, and they learned in flight schools. But you know what? You could do that. A foreigner could come to America and learn how to be a pilot. And here's the best thing about it: you only have to learn how to fly the plane. You don't have to worry about taking off, and you don't have to worry about landing. You just have to fly it and crash it. So very carefully, they arranged all this. Where's Osama bin Laden during all this? He's in Afghanistan, where Al Qaeda is doing its training. Okay. Back then, there was very little security. You could get on airplanes easy. There were hijackings back in the day because they didn't have metal detectors and stuff in the airport. Plus, there's a surprise factor. Nothing like this had happened really to America, so we're not looking for it to happen. Well, something simple like a box cutter. It's a little slidey knife with the blade. It's not a big thing, and you could probably smuggle that on an airplane back then. So what they decided to do was get the people on the airplane that could fly it, take over the airplane, get the pilots out of the seats. By using the box cutters, you could take suitors as somebody as a hostage, because who would know? They would think you're hijacking the plane. And then they decided to use the planes as weapons. Well, there's footage out there that you guys can get of the cockpit recordings, the calls for help and stuff like that. But basically, that morning, they're going to hijack 4 planes, right? And the 4 planes have targets. Basically, they hijack them early in the morning. 19 terrorists get on those planes, and they wait. The targets. Well, the World Trade Centers, if you look at the picture over here behind the Statue of Liberty, these 2 tall buildings, these are the World Trade Centers. It symbolizes, big corporations, companies, profit, worldwide companies, trade and stuff like that. And it's a symbol. Look how they dwarf everything else in Manhattan. They were tall buildings, They're a symbol of American companies and prowess around the world economically. They decided to crash a plane into each one. And they're tall buildings, too. The Pentagon, if you look down here, this 5-layer building, the Pentagon, dating back from World War II, is where the United States military has as its headquarters. They were just going to crash a plane into the Pentagon. Now, the fourth target is kind of curious. We don't know. It was in Washington, but was it the White House? Was it the Capitol building? Was it the Pentagon again? We don't know, and you'll understand why. Why these targets? Think about it. The World Trade Centers symbolize U.S. money, trade, economy, okay? The Pentagon, that's the U.S. military. Who's in the Middle East that they don't want in the Middle East? The U.S. military. Washington, well, that symbolizes everything about America, our government, our everything. Okay? There's a reason why they picked what they picked. And when you think how cold-hearted that is, that you're going to use an airplane as a weapon, you're going to kill a lot of people. Not only yourself, which is obviously going to happen, but think of the people on the airplanes and all the other people. You got to be so cold-hearted and cowardly to do that. It just rankles the mind that people could think that something that evil. It's just incredible. All right. The first targets were the World Trade Center. American Flight 11, with 86 passengers and crew, hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Now, this isn't the first time a building in New York had been hit by a plane. The Empire State Building had been hit, I believe it was, back in the 40s, in the fog by a bomber, but it didn't do that much damage. This is a huge, big airliner with all that gas, and it hits with a lot of force. Now, I was teaching at Burke back then, and this is why I want you to ask your parents. They will remember where they were when they heard about 9/11 and what they thought. I was walking by the library, and they had a TV in the library. There's a whole bunch of kids standing around the TV, so I stepped into the library. It's my plan period, I believe, and everybody was looking at it. What happened? Well, a plane crashed into the World Trade Center, and I was like, wow. So I was watching, and then they made this announcement: everybody go to class and turn off the TVs. And they made an announcement for teachers that they wanted a normal educational day. There'll be no TVs on the building or, in the building on, blah, 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 just teach your normal lessons. Well, I thought, that's stupid. So I went out to my portable, and I taught in the portable as far away from the building as I could be, or maybe it was them trying to put me away from the building as far as they could get me. But I was in a portable, the last portable out. And so you know what? I got in there, I turned on the TV, and all morning long, me and my classes, we watched, and we saw when the second plane crashed. It shocked the crud out of us. Then we watched, one of my classes and I saw the buildings come down. Oh my God. It was like every kid in the portable was just like silent. What do you say when you know all those people in those buildings that didn't get out? It was shocking. Now, we have footage, if you look at the pictures here, of the second plane hitting. There's no footage of the first plane hitting, but the second plane, yes, absolutely. Now, the second plane comes right into the building, and look at the fireball. If you look at this picture here, you can see the North Tower already burning, and look at the upper floors. The plane luckily hit higher. That hit lower. Everybody above that plane would have been trapped. But look where it hit on the South Tower. When that hit, look at that fireball. It's huge. Now, there's conspiracy nuts out there all over the place, and I had some students that kept going, oh, I saw on the internet, it didn't happen. Kids, it happened. It was an airplane that hit that building, and all the fuel in that airplane explodes. You can see it. You watch it, and the effect of that and the heat and everything like that affected the stability of the building. The South Tower was actually the first to collapse at 9:59, but before it collapsed, between the time the airplanes hit the building and when it collapsed, New York firemen and New York policemen went to the buildings. They went to the buildings to get people out, to help people, to protect people. Firemen went into those buildings. And after 9/11, firemen and policemen were heroes to America because they symbolized what was best in America. Those people that were brave and ran in to save people to risk their own lives. When those buildings came down, there were a lot of firefighters and police that passed away, and that was a sad time for America. One of the links that I've got on the classroom for you to look at is going to be cameras in New York, and they'll show the buildings collapse and the wall of smoke and everything that just roars through the city. It was like it was just stunning. It was like nothing America had ever seen. And it shut down the city of New York. There were a lot of people in those buildings still that did not get out. And very sadly, some of the people above the fire jumped, and you can see some of those people in the slow in the pictures and the slow footage, and that is the most sad, tragic, horrible thing to have to make a choice like that. A lot of people passed away in those buildings. And even the people that didn't die but were there, their lives were affected. There's going to be health things, all that smoke and everything. The people went in afterwards looking for bodies and survivors and whatnot. They got that in their lungs, and there's been a lot of harm and medical problems for those people ever since. So the first attacks were the World Trade Center. The planes come in and slam into it. American Flight 77 hits the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon is 5 layers, and it's got these big concrete walls and stuff. And the plane crashed into the building, and the damage it did. Now, because the building is so massive, as the plane went in, the plane basically disintegrated. And again, there were conspiracy nuts on the internet. They're going, oh, there was no plane. There was a plane. They pulled out the engines. The casualties in the Pentagon were real. These are American servicemen serving their country. And when the plane hit, it was so quick, so instantaneous. The casualties were just staggering how fast they were. But they crashed a plane into the Pentagon. So now there's been 3 terrorist attacks in America. Well, the news got out that there's hijackers on these planes. Well, there's one more plane out there. Flight 93 takes off, and somewhere over Pennsylvania, it was hijacked. Unfortunately for the hijackers, the surprise was gone. By this time, the other planes have crashed. We know what's going on, and some of the people on the plane call their loved ones when they find the news, and we know something's happening. The plane turns around and heads towards Washington, D.C. Somewhere in this flight, the passengers decided that they were not going to let this plane be used as a weapon. And one of the passengers was talking to his wife, and you hear the words, "Let's roll." And the passengers attacked the hijackers. They overwhelmed the hijackers, and the plane, instead of being used as a weapon attacking Washington, D.C., crashes by Shanksville, Pennsylvania. There's a picture there of the wreckage. Everybody on the plane was killed. But it becomes kind of a symbol. It's horrible, it's tragic, it's sad. Those families are heartbroken. But it becomes a symbol because the passengers fought back against those hijackers. They thwarted the hijackers' plan at the risk of their lives. And that's bravery. Today you go to Shanksville, there's a memorial. Now, America was just in shock. George Bush, in the picture in the middle, was the President of the United States. He was in Florida, I believe it was. I think he was reading at a school or something when they came in and let him know. George Bush was whisked on his plane, Air Force One, to Omaha, Nebraska. Because SAC, we've got a big bunker down below the ground, and we didn't know what was going on, what country was behind this. All airplanes in America were landed at the nearest airport. The Air Force, when it was scrambled, and all the planes landed. It was crazy. For a couple of days, kids, you looked up in the sky, there wasn't a contrail anywhere. There were no flights anywhere. New York, Wall Street was closed. Sporting events. I mean, how can you have a sporting event with a tragedy like this? Everything stops. The country was angry. We were furious. But George Bush, as president, really handled it. He had a lot of decorum. He addressed the country. He had a calming influence and very presidential. Now, if you look at the picture down below, the 3 firefighters raising a flag on a spar on the wreckage of the World Trade Centers, that's the picture I remember from the World Trade Centers. The tragedy was done, but America's spirit showed. And basically, George Bush declared war on terrorism. We will fight Al-Qaeda, and we will get all those people responsible. And this changes, everything. In the Middle East, there's going to be a day of reckoning. We go ahead and we shoot missiles at all the Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan we can, but the damage that we do is really minuscule. We put a massive reward out on Osama bin Laden's head. And in 2001, we invaded Afghanistan. We actually started out with special service forces, and they worked with the people in Afghanistan who were fighting the Taliban that were there. And the Taliban were there were the ones that allowed, they were these very religious fundamentalists, and they allowed Osama bin Laden and his group to be there. Well, we held them responsible. They wouldn't give him up. America invaded Afghanistan. We also would end up invading Iraq. Iraq's connection to 9/11 really was never really proven. It was very tenuous. And it was one of those things that we did it, but years later we find, all the reasons we thought we were going to Iraq became very murky. We thought Iraq had nuclear weapons. They didn't. We thought they were building them. They couldn't. We thought that they had more chemical weapons than they did. We thought that they were involved. And all that is really tenuous. In the end, we went into Afghanistan in 2011. It wasn't until this last winter that we finally signed a treaty to try to get out. Yeah, kids, that many years later. And we're still totally not out because we have forces in Afghanistan. As for Osama, it takes 10 years. Osama bin Laden finally gets hit. A SEAL team found that he was hiding in a Pakistani complex, and they went in and they killed him. They identified the body, they took DNA samples, and they chucked it off a boat in the Persian Gulf so he would never have a grave as a martyr's grave anywhere. It took a while to get that revenge. Revenge, though, doesn't bring back all the people that we lost. In the end, what did we learn about 9/11? Well, we get involved in wars in Afghanistan and then Iraq. We're mostly out of Iraq. We still have forces there. And we still have forces in Afghanistan. It's easy to get into a war. It's a lot of times harder to get out. Homeland Security is formed. Kids, you don't remember this, your parents do. They came up with all these different alarms and different colors. Today is a code yellow day and the security threat. And because Homeland Security was formed, we have foiled other, terrorist attacks on America or thoughts of. There were people that were arrested in Washington trying to sneak in. They think they're going after the Space Needle. There's other cases in other places in America where Homeland Security has been able to thwart them. We've never had an attack as big as 9/11, but we have had other attacks. Shootings in California, shootings at military bases. There have been smaller ones, but luckily Homeland Security is out there. You can sleep soundly knowing that they're out there doing their job. Airplane security, look at the picture over there. If you've flown anywhere, now you have to take off your shoes. You have to put everything on the thing. It goes through the metal detectors. They put you in those little containers and see if there's any chemical residue on you and all that. They found a guy flying once trying to light his tennis shoes on fire because he had explosives in the tennis shoes that didn't go off. Go figure, he was sweating because he was nervous and it didn't. They got him. But now they check everything. That changes everything. You don't just go to the airport. Now, if it's going to be busy, you got to think about, when am I going? Though with COVID, it's actually pretty easy to go to the airport right now, but eventually it'll be ramped up again. Very sadly, a lot of those security people at their airports have come down with COVID too because of it. There is the do not fly list, there's security. When you go on planes, the cockpit doors have to be lockable so they can't be taken over. They screen passengers very heavily. In the end, though, terrorists are going to change their tactics. They're not going to use the airplane thing again because we're on to that one. So they do other things. And there's other levels. If you look over the picture over here, that was the Boston Marathon bombing. 2 brothers did that. The San Bernardino shootings, the husband and wife, opened fire. Tampa down at the Pulse, that nightclub down there where people went in and just shot it. Terrorists have changed their tactics. It's a new thing in the world. Now you have to understand and you have to be careful. But there's different ways, like Europe. In Europe, there have been people like in England with knives, in Germany using cars and vehicles as weapons. Terrorism keeps changing. It's like a many-headed hydra. You have to keep cutting the heads off. and you have to be careful. And that's why governments really put a lot into security. Things changed. 9/11 changed everything. All right, go to the classroom part. And on the classroom, I've got some links that show you the footage of the buildings collapsing, the planes hitting. There's going to be some links on YouTube to other attacks and other stuff. And then your assignment over on Classwork, where you're going to talk to your parents and you're going to ask them, what do they remember about 9/11? How did that change America? Kids, it did.